Have you ever been watching a show where a character does something so obviously wrong that you actually say out loud, "Wait a minute, what are you doing?" If so, it's because they're acting in ways that you know they never would. I just finished watching the Alex Rider series on Amazon, and this is exactly what happened. The first season was great, the second was meh, but the third season was just wrong. And it wasn't just a bad season. It was a structural integrity issue with the character. Alex Rider isn't just some kid in danger. He's supposed to be the smartest guy in the room, who doesn't trust the room. But in season 3, he completely misses things that he never would have missed before. I saw it. Why didn't he? When the audience feels like they're way ahead of the protagonist, sometimes you get tension, but only if the protagonist is actually moving toward the truth in a believable way. And in this case, we'd outpaced Alex because the show needed to make Alex dumber for the sake of the plot. And here's how this matters, because it happens a lot. Only most writers don't even realize when they're doing it. So if your story feels off, but you can't quite figure out why, there's a very good chance it's your plot. Or more specifically, it's what your plot is forcing your character to do. And so today, I want to walk you through how to recognize when this is happening, and more importantly, how to fix it. Hello, and welcome to the Storyteller's Mission with Zena Del Lowe. Let's get started. Getting back to Alex Rider. The very main problem that I'm addressing here is that the show needed him to be wrong. The plot required deception, delayed reveals, emotional manipulation. But instead of making the deception good enough to fool Alex, they made Alex less discerning. A strong story says, make the lie smarter than the hero. A weak story says, make the hero dumber than the lie. And that's exactly what happened in season 3. Alex's defining trait is pattern recognition. In seasons 1 and 2, he was seeing things that nobody else could have seen. But it made sense. It was believable that he saw those things. So then, when he starts missing some very obvious things in season 3, that creates a contradiction. We, the audience, start thinking, either I'm smarter than Alex or the writing is off. The writers softened him. Not emotionally. That's fine. You want to soften a character emotionally? That's fine. They softened him cognitively. They cheated him out of his intelligence. And once you soften a character's competence, you break the contract that you originally established with your audience. Because now we're not watching a capable protagonist who's navigating a dangerous world. We're watching a story that is manipulating a character in order to hit plot beats. And we can feel that. Now, the fix isn't to make Alex smarter. He already is. The fix, though, for the plot is actually to make the antagonist smarter. Make the lies more precise. That way, when it happens, we understand. We're going to be like, oh, he sees the red flags, but he's choosing to ignore them. That's something we can get behind because we understand that that's human. That's a tragedy, but it's very believable. But what these writers did is they violated the character's truth. And once that breaks, the whole story feels off. Now, the good news is, once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them, which means you can learn how to spot it when you're doing it, and therefore you can learn how to avoid doing it in your own story. What I'm describing is basically what happens when the plot requires a character to be blind. The key here is that it's about taking smart characters and then suddenly dropping their IQs. They're not behaving like themselves when that happens, and it usually shows up in a couple of ways. A lot of times it's because the character misses something that's obvious, but other times it's because other characters withhold information that would normally or naturally come out. In both cases, the result is the same. The story stops feeling true or honest, because now instead of watching a character pursue a goal based on what they know and should know, we're just watching the writer manipulate that character in order to protect the plot. Here's how to test if this is happening in your story. Ask yourself, has the character already proven that they are observant or strategic or perceptive? And if the answer is yes, then ask yourself, are they now missing something that they absolutely would have caught earlier. If so, you don't have a tension problem, you have a credibility problem. Let me give you another example. Sherlock Holmes. I'm talking about the Benedict Cumberbatch version. In early seasons of this series, Sherlock was hyper observant, as he should be. He notices microscopic details. The audience is constantly trying to keep up with him. But in later seasons, especially season 4, he starts to miss massive psychological manipulations, entire scenarios that hinge on him not asking obvious questions, things that he absolutely normally would ask. Other characters also lose sharpness. Mycroft, Watson, they drop IQ points as well. And the reason this happened is because the show started escalating to bigger and more emotional plot twists. But instead of making the puzzles smarter, it made the characters less discerning. We saw the same thing in Game of Thrones with a lot of different characters, but let's talk about one in particular, Tyrion Lannister. Now, this is a character whose entire identity was built on being the smartest guy in the room. It's the only way he survived. And then later in the series, he suddenly just stops questioning things. He misses obvious political threats. He falls for traps that he normally would have designed himself. He makes decisions that contradict years of established intelligence. And the problem is, the show outran the source material, and they needed to accelerate plot resolution. So they sacrifice strategy for speed. And when the show needs constant twists and turns like this one wanted, competence often gets periodically suspended. So now I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, that's not Tyrion, that's the plot. Because characters do not suddenly lose intelligence unless the writer needs them to. The pattern across all of these is that the plot becomes greater than the character. The story needs something to happen, so then the characters behave in ways to make that happen, even if it's not consistent with who they are. Their intelligence becomes inconsistent to us. We start thinking that the characters are brilliant when they're solving problems, but oblivious when the plot needs tension. Now, writers often think, oh, if the audience sees the danger coming before the character does, that can create tension. And sometimes that's true, sometimes it does. But only if the character is moving toward the truth in a believable way that's consistent with who they are. There are two kinds of ways in which the audience gets ahead. And the good way is, I see the danger, oh my gosh, now how are they going to escape it? The bad way is when the audience starts asking, why don't they see the danger? I do. And that's when they stop trusting the person. They can see that it's clearly a setup. It's obviously a trap. And if your character just walks straight into it with no resistance, that's not tension. That's frustration. So here's the key distinction. Tension is when the audience knows beforehand, oh no, they're walking into danger. Frustration is, why are they acting like such an idiot? How did they not see this coming? Now, why does this keep happening? Well, it usually starts to happen because the writers start escalating the stakes with bigger plot twists, bigger deception, bigger emotional swings. But in the process, they forget that you have to escalate the intelligence of the opposition even as you do those things. If you don't, your only lever is to make your characters worse at their jobs. Okay, let's look at a couple of ways in which this happens, all right? One is called the information gap. And this is actually a way that you can test if your story is doing it. All you have to do is ask yourself, does the character have access to the same clues that the audience has? Have they demonstrated the ability to interpret those clues? And if the answer to both of those questions is yes, then they should be drawing similar conclusions that your audience is drawing. If they aren't, then that means that the writer, you, are artificially withholding cognition. There's another one. It's called false emotional justification. This is where a lot of writers think they're safe, but they're not. Emotion does not erase intelligence. It competes with it. So if a character is being deceived, then we need to see the internal conflict happening inside the character, even as it's going on. We need to see the hesitation, the rationalization, not just blind acceptance, not just they missed it. If the character isn't wrestling with the lie, then we don't believe they'd fall for it. Here's another one. Competence Inconsistency. This one shows up all over television. You want to ask yourself, is the character brilliant in one scene and then seemingly oblivious in the next? And if they are, that isn't complexity, that's inconsistency. Competence isn't a mood. It's a trait, which means it has to be consistent. Once they have that trait, they should display it consistently throughout the telling. Okay, here's another one. Artificial secrecy. This is where characters withhold information from other characters, not because they would, but because the plot needs them to. And the audience can smell it everywhere. It's awful. For example, there's this moment in Alex Rider where he's been fooled into thinking that Mrs. Jones has had his father killed. Mrs. Jones is his handler, right? And so he's been sent to kill her by the enemy. And stupidly, Alex, which goes against character, we never buy it, is sort of following through on that, and he's now pointing a gun at Mrs. Jones, and he's saying, "You killed my dad. I heard you say, take the shot." Now, here's the thing. From the moment I saw the video where Mrs. Jones is saying that, I knew it was a setup. I knew it. Why didn't Alex? And the thing is, if it is misleading, if it's wrong, then in a truthful world, the other character would respond to it. There's actually three natural options. The first would be to deny it immediately. No, that's not true. The second is that they would clarify the context. I know that's what you heard, but it's not what you think, right? That can add tension and mystery, but they're going to at least clarify. Yes, that's what I said, but you don't understand the full thing that happened here. There's more to the story, right? The third is if they deflect with a reason. I would like to explain to you what really happened, but it's classified or it's dangerous to explain. But when they do none of those things, and it would be normal for them to do that, and there's no reason that they wouldn't do that, then that creates a vacuum. And that vacuum doesn't read as mystery to us, it reads as manipulation. Because now the audience is thinking, you could clear this up in one sentence, so why aren't you? And we get frustrated. If a character withholds crucial information, the story owes us a believable reason why. Not a vague reason, not a we'll explain it later. A clear, immediate, character-driven reason in that moment. Otherwise, it isn't intrigue, it isn't tension, it's stalling, and it feels so fake to us because it's violating intent. There are legitimate reasons to withhold information. I don't want you walking away from this episode thinking that characters should always explain everything. No, great stories use withheld information all the time. It is a great device to add tension, but it only works when the reason is active and costly and truly justified. Maybe they don't trust the person that they're talking to, so they're going to keep that information close to their chest. Maybe they need the other person to act on false information because there's a bigger play in that moment. Maybe they're unsure of the truth themselves, and so they can't clarify it. There are all sorts of ways to justify why a character would legitimately withhold information. The critical question is, do we buy it? We need to feel that in the scene. We need to feel that the reason they're withholding it is justified even as it's happening in that scene. The writers came to a point where they're sort of like, well, if the character says this out loud, the plot collapses. And so they just didn't have the character say it. But that's not character behavior, that's writer avoidance. The intelligence reallocation problem. This is another version of this that starts to show up in a lot of book series or ensemble stories, namely television or even movie series, right? And it's a little more subtle. And this is when the story starts redistributing intelligence. Now, I've been seeing this a lot in the series Slow Horses. If you're not familiar, it's based on a book series. It's actually really great initially. It's about these spies who have made mistakes, and therefore they get sent to Slough House, which is under the direction of a guy named Lamb. Now, one of our main characters is a spy named River Cartwright. Now, early on, River is very sharp. He's asking the right questions. He's driving the investigation. And in fact, he was set up to be sent to Slough House. So he actually doesn't belong there. He's actually a very capable and intelligent agent who's been underestimated. But by later seasons, something has radically shifted. Suddenly, River is an idiot. He's behind on everything. He's not asking questions he would have asked before. In fact, all of the supporting characters, all of the characters in Slough House start behaving like idiots. And you're like, what is going on? Why are they not connecting the dots that they would have connected earlier? Well, it's because of this. Jackson Lamb, played by Gary Oldman. Well, by this point in the story, he has become the only one allowed to be truly perceptive. He's the one who has to figure everything out. He's the one who sees what no one else sees. And suddenly the entire show is built around him being the smartest person in the room. But here's the problem. It's not River got outmatched. It's that he got diminished because they decided Gary Oldman had to be the star. But in a strong story, you don't make one character shine by weakening everyone else. You make them shine by putting them up against people who are just as capable. Well, the real issue is plot dependency. At the end of the day, all of it comes back to this one thing. And that's when your plot only works if your character fails to be able to think. That's the red flag. Because a strong story works when the character acts intelligently, when the opposition is strong enough to counter them, when the conflict escalates naturally. But in a weak story, the character only acts intelligently until it becomes inconvenient to the plot. So how do you fix it? Well, I've given you a lot of ways to at least test it already, but here are some ways that you can actually fix it. Number one, let the truth come out, but then complicate it. Instead of just hiding the information, reveal it. Number two, give the character a reason not to clarify. Not a vague reason, a specific immediate cost. For example, if I tell you the truth, they'll kill your friend. Now their silence makes sense. Turn the withholding into strategy. Make it so that the character isn't avoiding the truth, they're using it to accomplish something. Number four, let the other character push back. So what am I really reacting to here? When you have violated the established intelligence hierarchy of your story world. This is the deeper layer. Now, the story, when you're doing that, is choosing control over truth. You're trying to control the pacing artificially, but in so doing, you have to sacrifice your character honesty and integrity. And once that goes, everything feels off. You start to lose your audience. Because when the characters are no longer behaving in alignment with their own knowledge and goals, the audience disengages. Because they stop believing. When they stop believing, they stop caring. Credibility makes your audience care. I hope that this has been helpful for you today. And if you have any questions or problems, or if you need help making sure that your character fulfills the audience's expectations in your story, then please do reach out to me at zena@thestorytellersmission.com. I'd love to help you finish your story well. Thank you for listening to The Storyteller's Mission with Zena Del Lo. May you go forth inspired to change the world for the better through story.